The sound of bells rang out one last time from a fading convent tucked high in the hills of Thessaly, a place where olive trees shivered in the wind, and silence had already begun to lay its claim. Inside the weathered chapel, a handful of nuns stood beneath ancient frescoes, saints whose faces had been worn away by time and grief. Beyond the stone walls, fire danced on the horizon. Ottoman banners approached, their red cloth flickering like blood in the wind. No messengers came, no soldiers defended the chapel, just the eerie quiet before a storm. Sister Eleni, the abbess, stood clutching a tarnished silver crucifix. It had survived generations of storms. Her voice trembled with resolve as she spoke to the women. If they breach our walls, keep your vows in your hearts, that they cannot take. But conquest doesn't stop for conviction, and history rarely asks permission before it erases. By the time fire reached the convent gates, there was no mercy left. Stones cracked, iron shattered wood, and hymns gave way to screams. The Ottomans didn't fire warning shots or offer negotiations. They crushed the gates with cannon blasts, not out of necessity, but symbolism. This wasn't just a building, it was a stand. One last piece of land where the cross still rose defiantly in conquered soil. Inside, the sisters hid what they could. Silver chalices, pieces of saints' relics, embroidered icons stitched with trembling fingers. They knew their bodies might be lost, but maybe, just maybe, their faith would outlive them. The soldiers weren't looking for treasure. They wanted something far more profound. Proof. Evidence that even holiness could be broken, that not just armies, but beliefs could be conquered. By nightfall, the surviving nuns were pulled into the courtyard. Firelight cast shifting gold against their white robes. They were told they'd be taken before the Pasha, a promise that, more often than not, meant death. But then something unexpected happened. The soldiers were prepared for wails, for cries, for submission. Instead, they heard singing. Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Their voices were weak, cracked by smoke and fear, but unwavering. The Ottoman captain hesitated. He had seen resistance, but never like this. He offered the abbess mercy, conversion in exchange for her sisters' lives. Her answer cut sharper than any blade. I have already given my life. What else can you take? He stared at her in silence. For a moment, the weight of her words seemed to ripple through the courtyard. Even the torches flickered, as if the wind had turned against him. His hand hovered midair, unsure whether to signal punishment or retreat. The younger soldiers looked to him for command, but he gave none. Eleni didn't blink. Her gaze met his, steady, unshaken, filled with something no sword could ever pierce. The captain stepped back as if burned, then turned his eyes to the ground. The air shifted. The soldiers who had been jeering moments earlier fell quiet. One muttered a prayer in his own tongue, perhaps unsure which god to direct it to. The abbess, still clutching the crucifix, lowered it slowly to her side. Not in surrender, but like a knight sheathing her blade after battle. The silence around her felt sacred, thick, defiant, alive. A rider dismounted nearby, holding a sealed order from the Pasha. It was read aloud, confirming that all captives were to be presented for judgment at dawn. The captain clenched his jaw, nodding without a word. Orders were orders, but no one looked him in the eye. That night, the women were not locked in cells, but made to kneel in the chapel ruins, surrounded by guards too uneasy to mock them. Rain began to fall, a soft mist at first, then heavier. Still, the sisters did not move. They knelt as if carved from the same stone that once built their sanctuary. A horse neighed nervously in the dark. One soldier cursed, another adjusted his grip on the torch. The firelight danced across Eleni's face, her expression unreadable, almost serene. One of the younger sisters, eyes wide with fear, leaned toward the abbess and whispered, "Will it hurt?" Eleni did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was calm. Pain ends. What matters is what comes after. The sky thundered. The wind picked up. Somewhere beyond the hills, wolves howled. Or perhaps it was something else, something older. One guard dropped his torch. Another swore he heard a bell that hadn't rung in years. No one slept that night. And when morning came, no one laughed, because something had changed, subtly, irrevocably. Not in the captives, but in the captors. They had expected broken women. What they found instead was something closer to legends. What came next wasn't detailed in the records. Even those who glorified war described it only as discipline for those who refused reason. Church chroniclers barely spoke of it. Silence was easier. By morning, the chapel was gone. The smoke from the convent's refectory, where women had once broken bread, drifted toward the mountains. The cross that once crowned the rooftop was pried down, packed and shipped east, a trophy for a throne room. But the story didn't end in ash. Whispers began in nearby villages. People said that at night, when the wind crept through the ruins, voices could be heard, not crying, not screaming, praying. What remained of the order, 22 women in torn habits, were marched south. Shackled at the ankles, flanked by horsemen, they weren't considered prisoners of war. They were tokens, human proof that even sacred walls fall. The path wound through scorched earth and empty villages, where windows gaped like eye sockets and doors swung on broken hinges. Each step forward was a farewell to the world they once knew. The sisters moved slowly, their habits stiff with soot and blood. The fabric clung to their skin in places, torn loose in others, but none of them asked for replacements. What they wore now was part of their story. A child peeked out from behind a tree as they passed, his face smeared with ash. His mother pulled him back before the guards noticed. Even the villagers, hardened by war, knew better than to make eye contact with symbols of defiance. These women were not to be comforted. They were to be displayed. Each village they passed offered a different kind of silence. Some doors were bolted tight, others left ajar, as if the homes themselves had given up. Birds no longer sang. Dogs barked and then fell quiet, confused by the scent of scorched linen and smoke-burned skin. One sister stumbled on a jagged rock, her ankle twisting awkwardly. A guard raised his whip, but it never struck. Another nun stepped between them, lifting the injured woman onto her back without a word. The line of captives didn't falter. Some of the younger soldiers looked away. Not all were hardened killers. Some had been pressed into service. To them, these weren't just enemies. They were mothers, sisters, perhaps even the women their own families might have once prayed to. A crow followed the march from above, circling lazily as if waiting. Dust clouded the air, making it hard to breathe. A sister near the rear began coughing, deep, rattling, persistent. One of the older nuns tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it to the girl's lips, holding her upright with arms that had not known rest in days. By the fourth day, the group's pace had slowed. Blisters bled through worn sandals, lips cracked from thirst, and still, they did not beg. Not for water, not for rest, not for mercy. When they crossed a dried riverbed, one of the guards laughed and said, "Even the land knows God has abandoned you." No one responded, but the look Sister Magdalena gave him was enough to quiet his chuckle. A look that said, "God sees further than you think." That night, the sisters were given no fire, no food, just rope and the cold earth. One began to hum, not a hymn, but a lullaby once sung by her mother. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear, but it passed through the group like a thread, weaving warmth into a place where no warmth should have survived. Another sister took up the melody, then another, until the whole group hummed in unison, barely audible, like wind brushing through the grass. The guards didn't stop them. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they didn't want to admit it was beautiful. In that moment, under a moon hidden behind clouds, the nuns became more than captives. They were memory, they were myth. And in their silence and song, they reclaimed something the empire never intended to give back: presence. The sun scorched the road. These were women who had barely stepped beyond their cloister. Now they stumbled, blistered, and burned. When one fell, another lifted her veil, not for vanity, but so it wouldn't be trampled. Even stripped of dignity, they found new ways to protect one another. The abbess was gone, but her words stayed. If you cannot hold the cross, hold each other. After 7 brutal days, they reached the coast. The port of Volos swarmed with Ottoman ships, built not for speed or comfort, but control. The women were packed aboard like livestock, their wrists chained to benches once used for convicts. As the sails unfurled, the land of Greece vanished behind the waves, and with it everything they'd ever known. The voyage to Constantinople took 12 punishing days. Storms lashed the ship, salt stung open wounds, hunger gnawed away at their resolve. But what broke them wasn't the pain, it was the silence. No one spoke to them, not even the guards except to bark orders. They became ghosts, suspended between ocean and sky. At night, one of the youngest, Sister Magdalena, whispered psalms beneath her breath. Her voice was so faint, it barely rose above the creaking timbers. But others began to listen. Greeks, Italians, Slavs. Even in chains, her prayers offered something the empire could not. When Constantinople's skyline finally rose, minarets glowing at dawn, the women were met not with reverence, but curiosity. Christian nuns were rare among Ottoman captives. They were paraded through streets choked with merchants and slaves. Locals stopped to stare, but none offered kindness. They were taken past the Hagia Sophia, once the greatest cathedral of Christendom, now repurposed for conquest. One of the sisters whispered, "We are home, but it is no longer ours." Their final destination wasn't a dungeon, but something colder, the Danishment Humayun, the imperial council, where the sultan's will was law. The Grand Vizier sat in judgment. He didn't shout, he didn't gloat, he didn't need to. His stillness was command enough. Scribes sat to either side, ready to record everything. Ages, names, intended uses. These weren't women anymore. They were lines in a ledger. The vizier's offer was simple: convert and live comfortably. Food, shelter, even positions within the palace. Refuse and face the discipline of faith. No one spoke. Magdalena trembled. She had seen what happened to other captives. But before guards could pull her forward, another sister stepped forward. Sister Dearest. She didn't beg. She didn't curse. She simply said, "You may rename us, but you cannot rewrite the prayers we carry." The vizier blinked, then replied, "Prayers fade when the tongue forgets how to speak them." They weren't executed, not yet. Instead, they were marched into the lowest chambers of the palace, a labyrinth of stone and silence. No windows, no sun. Each woman was stripped of her name and given a number. Their days became routine, scrubbing floors, tending fires, sewing garments they'd never wear. They were no longer nuns, just laborers, invisible. And yet the Ottomans miscalculated something. These women had already taken vows of silence. Hunger and isolation didn't break them. It reminded them who they were. At night, they prayed in whispers. One etched a cross into the clay wall with her fingernail. Another traced scripture into the dust beneath her straw bed. Even their silence became defiance. Servants began to whisper of strange women buried beneath the palace. Women who never spoke, never begged. Some said they were cursed. Others called them saints. When brute force failed, the empire changed tactics. They sent kindness next. A little food, warm oil for their hands, polite scholars who spoke gently, offering freedom in exchange for forgetting. "Your God and ours are not enemies," said one imam. "Take our tongue and you will be free." But they all understood what that freedom cost. To forget was the only sin they refused. Sister Magdalena, once frail, now became their pillar. She led prayers no longer from books, but from memory. When words failed, she sang. So the kindness stopped. No more food, no more light. One by one, they were taken into a narrow room and asked to speak one phrase of submission. If they obeyed, they were dressed in silk and never seen again. If they refused, silence. 2 sisters gave in, twins from Corfu. Their numbers vanished, but the rest grew stronger. Sister Dearest smiled when guards asked her name. "Call me Silence," she said. After that, none of them spoke again. Time passed differently in the dark. Days blurred. But one day, deep beneath the palace, they found something. A sealed archway, hidden behind dust and stone. At first, it was shelter. Then, it became something sacred. They made candle holders from broken pottery, an altar cloth from a rag of linen, a cross from a shard of mirror. Here they met each night, not to mourn, but to remember. They spoke only in memories, a taste of bread, a church bell, a warm hand. These became their new psalms. Magdalena began marking the wall with charcoal, one bird for every sister still alive, a flame for those lost. Even when the palace above changed hands, new sultans, new rules, the hidden chapel remained untouched. Years passed. The Ottomans wrote them off as failed conversions, but servants whispered of voices echoing through the stone, chanting in a language no one recognized, but everyone feared. Centuries later, that chapel was found. Archaeologists uncovered the chamber, crosses scratched into stone, a Latin phrase half erased, lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in darkness. And in that forgotten room, something became clear. These women hadn't disappeared, they had endured. Not with swords, not with rebellion, but with silence carved into stone. If that story stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let their memory live through your voice. And if you're ready to uncover more truths buried beneath centuries of silence, subscribe and step deeper with us. Some truths refuse to die.